found his boots. He found the terminal, an old hybrid relay unit. Half human, half reverse-engineered alien tech, once used during the early transition. Years to coordinate child labor transfers between moons. It should have been junked years ago, but it hummed. And then, without a command, it spoke. Not in Corithian, not in code, but in the broken, trembling voice of a woman. Her voice projected grainy and raw across the screen. Please, ... If anyone out there can hear me, my name is Saad Omotola. My children Joleel and Amina, they were taken. Please, my babies. Someone, anyone, help me. I know they're alive. I know it. The floor seemed to vanish beneath him. His breath caught, snagged in his chest, like it had forgotten how to move. The screen stabilized just enough to show her face, aged, exhausted, framed by a gray scarf and sunburnt cheeks, eyes wide with pain. His mother, her voice cracked, but kept speaking, kept begging. A recording from Earth broadcasted on what looked like a global recovery feed. Behind her stood aid workers, banners in multiple languages, and broken mothers from every continent holding up pictures of their stolen children. It wasn't just his mother, it was the world. Earth still remembered, still grieved. The realization struck like an avalanche. Earth isn't gone. They'd told him it was destroyed in a containment accident. Radioactive collapse. Too dangerous to revisit. The perfect lie. And he'd believed them for years. But now, in the dark silence of the cargo bay, that belief collapsed in a flood of grief he had no armor against. His knees buckled. He dropped to the floor. And for the first time since he was 10 years old, Joleel wept. Not the quiet, contained kind, but the full-body shaking sobs of a boy who'd been ripped from the world and finally knew he'd never been forgotten. The screen looped again, glitching, static overtaking the image, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The pain uncoiled from where it had been buried all these years and burned like it had just happened again. His mother's voice echoed in the steel walls. Please, someone bring my babies home. It was Casey who found him, half an hour later, still on his knees, face buried in his hands, the screen flickering on the wall like a bleeding wound. Jesus, Casey muttered, dropping to a crouch beside him. Joleel, what is this? Joleel didn't answer. He couldn't. He just turned the screen toward him. Casey watched the footage loop once, then again, then sat back, jaw slack. They lied. Holy shit. They lied about Earth. The two sat in silence, hearts racing, minds unraveling. Then Joleel stood slowly, shakily, like rising through gravity that didn't want to let go, and scanned the room with a new clarity. The terminal side panel blinked faintly, connected to a dormant Corithian beacon, relay rusted, but intact. A long-range transmitter. It would be nearly impossible to activate undetected, but theoretically, it could reach Earth. I'm sending a message, Joleel said, voice hoarse. I need to let them know we're still alive. Casey stared at him, stunned, then grinned, wild and reckless. Now that's the dumbest, bravest thing I've heard all year. He slapped Jolly's shoulder. Let's do it. They spent the next hour tearing into the terminal's guts, rewiring old protocols, bypassing Corithian firewalls they weren't supposed to understand, but had learned anyway, because that's what survival required. Casey handled the power loop, while Joleel coded the message, his mother's name, coordinates for Kura 7, and a brief, scrambled list of survivors. It was crude, obvious, dangerous. You really think they'll hear it? Casey asked as they synced the pulse. Joleel didn't answer. He just stared into the signal, like it was a portal home. I have to try. The moment they triggered the beacon, the air changed. It wasn't visible, not audible, but they both felt it, like the whole station had taken a breath and decided not to exhale. Sirens didn't blare, doors didn't slam. The Corithians didn't storm in with weapons drawn. They didn't need to. They were always watching, always listening. The floor opened beneath them literally, gravity fields shifted, magnetic clamps disengaged, and from the ceiling, a squad of overseers descended like silent executioners. Casey glanced at Jalil, then grinned one last time. "Guess we found the line, huh?" he said, and before Jalil could stop him, he stepped forward, arms raised, head high. "It was me," he said. "I found the beacon. I activated it." He tried to stop me. The Corethians paused, analyzing, scanning. Jalil opened his mouth, but Casey turned and shot him a look. "Don't." And then they took him. No trial, no hesitation. The order came within seconds. A searing pulse from a neural disintegrator silenced Casey's body, mid-sentence. It collapsed in on itself, his flesh turning to ash, his armor melting in place. Gone. Just like that. Jalil didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stood there, staring at the place where his friend had been. Something cold and irreversible, setting into his bones. The overseers turned to him. "Return to duty," one said. "Your failure has been contained." Jalil nodded, walked out, didn't say a word. But as he crossed back into the dust-blown light of the mining fields, the wind howling against his armor, something inside him shifted forever. Not grief, not rage, not even vengeance, just clarity. He was done obeying. The next time he moved, it would not be to follow orders. It would be to break them. The days after Casey's death moved like liquid steel, slow, heavy, and searing with every breathers. Jalil drifted through his assigned routines with mechanical precision, his eyes dulled but his mind burning. On the outside, nothing changed. He ran drills, patrolled the mining corridors, gave reports to Corethian supervisors in their dead language, nodded when ordered, saluted when seen. But inside, he had begun to whisper. It started with one word in the dark earth, mouthed to a girl named Tala, as she lay bleeding beside a cracked bulkhead. Too weak to protest. Then came questions murmured during equipment checks, half-sent, passed between ration crates and water lines. "Do you remember Lagos, Nairobi, Boston? Do you remember the sky?" A few nodded. Some cried. Others turned away in fear. But some just a few listened. Whispers grew roots. Jalil moved like a ghost. Between sectors, planting ideas instead of weapons. The rebellion wasn't loud. It was in the way people paused now before saluting, the way they held eye contact for a second too long, the way they walked slower when near an overseer, daring them to notice. But suspicion followed. Someone was reporting him. He knew it. By the way shift assignments suddenly changed around him, by the way the surveillance drones lingered longer, by how Inari no longer sat near him during debriefs. She watched him nound, with contempt, but with the cold detachment of a surgeon examining a tumor. Then came the patrol, to the outer ridge, the dead zone where old tunnels collapsed during the gas leak 7 years ago. It was supposed to be routine, a structural scan. But while sweeping the lower crevices, his scanner pinged faint biosigns, multiple. He broke protocol, moved deeper, down into the broken arteries of Karasavin, where only ghosts should have lived, and he found them a prison colony, human. Crude shelters built from discarded mining parts, walls smeared with ash and waste, air thick with unfiltered dust. The ones who hadn't adapted, the rejects, the mentally unstable, the broken, they'd been thrown here, forgotten, dozens of them pale and scarred, some crawling, others half-conscious. Jalil moved through them in a daze until he saw her, huddled in the corner of a collapsed dome, face wrapped in cloth, arms marked with old restraint scars, her eyes sunken but sharp. She looked up as he approached, flinched at his armor, then froze, and he knew. Beneath the dirt and damage, beneath the years and silence, Amina, his sister, alive, disfigured, breathing. "Amina," he whispered, kneeling before her, helmet off, voice cracking from disuse. "It's me." She didn't speak. just stared. Her eyes flicked toward his hands, his face, his chest, searching, trying to recognize what time had buried. He reached out, trembling, and touched her shoulder. She didn't pull away, but she didn't embrace him either. Over the next 2 weeks, he returned, always alone, always in the dark. He brought her ration packs, filtered water, a heat coil. He spoke to her not about war, or Kura, or rebellion, but about home, about Earth, about Mama Zakara, and the smell of dust in the rain. He told her stories she might have forgotten, how she once kicked a football into a market stall and made an old man spill his soup, how she used to hide under his bed during storms. Amina didn't smile, not once, but she listened. Sometimes, when he spoke of clouds and sunlight, her fingers twitched like they were reaching for memories she couldn't hold. Then, one night, she spoke. Just one sentence, quiet, fractured. "I remember the sky," she said. "I don't remember your voice." And Jalil broke. He didn't cry. There was no time for that anymore. But he sat beside her, and for the first time in 12 years, he sang a lullaby their mother used to hum while scrubbing clothes. Amina closed her eyes. She didn't hum along, but she didn't move away. And that was enough. The uprising wasn't ready. But Jalil no longer cared. The others were still organizing, still debating plans, still waiting for weapons caches and timing signals. He had no more time. They'd find her soon. The colony was already destabilizing. Whispers had spread too far. They would purge again like they always did. He met with Inari in the ration hold, tried to persuade her, told her Earth was alive, that Amina lived, that they didn't have to be tools anymore. She stared at him in silence. Her eyes flickered once. She asked, "Is this what Casey died for?" And he nodded. "Then you've already failed," she said, and walked away. They came at midnight, silent, precise, not in armor but in lab coats and containment suits. No warning, no alarms. Jalil heard the breach alert over his personal comm, and by the time he reached the outer ridge, it was already over. The prison colony burned. Smoke and ash bled into the black sky. Charred shelters collapsed inward. Drones hovered, scanning bodies, and Amina, bound, gagged, unconscious, was loaded into a containment pod, scheduled for termination. Class D, organic and salvageable, the Corithian commander said. Erasure authorized by Internal Agent 73. Inari Jalil stood at the ridge's edge, fists clenched, heart burning, but he didn't move. He didn't charge. He didn't scream. Not yet. Not now. The time would come, and when it did, they would remember who they tried to erase. The fires of rebellion spread faster than the Corithians could calculate, leaping from moon to moon like sparks in dry grass, igniting fury long buried beneath layers of silence and programming. Word of Jalil's broadcast echoed through the deep network smuggled via fractured signal chains, coded into stolen maintenance logs, whispered through ventilation shafts by children who had never spoken freely until now. On mining colony Delta 4, a girl named Rini stabbed her handler with a broken rebreather tube and unlocked the containment barracks herself. On training satellite Kefir 9, the youngest trainees hacked the neural feedback system and turned it into an amplifier for protest. Chants human voices screaming across metal corridors, "We are Earth." As overseers fell in confusion, some revolts failed, some were crushed, but others survived, others grew. And when the Corithian command grid collapsed, when the AI purges turned inward and fractured the chains of command, everything changed. Slave worlds flickered offline, transport routes vanished, surveillance systems blinked to black. The Corithians, masters of control, breeders of obedience, were suddenly afraid, because their tools had remembered what it meant to be free. Jalil stood on the scorched tarmac of Cora 7's southern launch bay, watching smoke rise from the ruined towers behind him as the remnants of their world limped toward the future. The small interstellar freighter they'd salvaged from a half-abandoned cargo facility was barely tritioled Earth tech fused with Corithian nav systems, but it worked. Enough to move, enough to escape, enough to go home. Around him stood 37 survivors, former child soldiers, broken miners, silent dreamers, all wearing makeshift gear. Some armored in pieces from fallen enemies, others wrapped in cloth and scavenged uniforms. They carried burns, broken bones, missing limbs, old wounds stitched with rage and resilience, but they stood tall. They were no longer tools, no longer units, no longer numbered. Each had a name again. Jaliel moved through them silently, hand on Amina's shoulder, as she walked beside him, not carried, not dragged, but standing on her own, eyes sharp, head high. The scars on her face were still raw, her steps uneven, but she was here, speaking again, leading with him. The ship groaned as they entered. Atmosphere still unstable from pressure leaks, but they ignored the warning lights. They'd survived. Worse, in the command chamber, Jalil moved toward the navigation console, flicking through the damaged interface with practiced ease. Amina sat near the observation window, staring out at the horizon where, just barely, a sliver of unpolluted sky peeked through the smoke. "It's bluer than I remember," she said, and her voice still low, still hoarse, made him pause. "Will they know what we are?" she asked. Her fingers traced the edge of the steel console. "When we land, when they see us." Jalil stared at the nav screen. Earth was a faint green dot now, just past 2 weeks away by emergency jump. So close, so impossible. He walked over to the side panel near the pilot's seat and unlocked Casey's old locker. It hadn't been touched since before the rise in backup systems, its access code still written in English. He opened it slowly. Inside, beneath a crumpled jumpsuit and a half-eaten protein bar, was a photo. A boy with messy hair, grinning beside 2 parents in a Michigan backyard. Summer light behind them, all teeth and laughter and bad fashion. Jalil held the photo in one hand, the ship humming around him, then placed it gently on the console, propped upright. "We're all going home," he said. "Not to Amina, not to anyone, but to Casey, to Earth, to the ghosts of what was taken." The ship's engines whined, the startup cycles stuttering as emergency thrusters kicked online. The others strapped in, murmuring, praying, gripping each other's hands in that quiet desperation only survivors understand. Amina looked at him one last time, not as the broken girl from the prison pit, not as the sister he once carried through fire, but as the leader she was becoming, scarred, quiet, certain. Jalil turned back to the controls, adjusted the trajectory, and whispered, "No, they won't know what we are." He reached for the ignition switch. "But we'll show them who we became." And with that, the ship rose slowly, shaking, uncertain, at first, then steadier, breaking gravity's hold, pushing through the ash-choked skies of Kuro 7 and into the open, endless dark, where stars still remembered Earth. Behind them, a system built on silence collapsed. Ahead, a planet waited, not for saviors, not for vengeance, but for the return of its children born free. Twice, the air was still in the early morning fields of rural Nigeria, heavy with dew and the soft rustle of cassava leaves. Chickens clucked lazily near a rusted gate, and somewhere in the distance, a goat bleated against the hush of dawn. Saad Omotola knelt in her garden, knees pressing gently into the earth as she worked. Hands covered in the clean, living soil, she turned every day with silent devotion. Her face was older, now creased deep at the eyes and mouth, not from age alone, but from waiting, from years of silent prayers whispered into kitchen corners, from a grief that never passed but also never quite hardened. She wore a simple headscarf, faded yellow with white trim, and hummed under her breath, a melody without words, one she'd sung for 2 decades now. It was the lullaby, always the lullaby. She didn't cry when she sang it anymore. She didn't expect miracles, but she still planted the seeds. She still kept the beds weeded. She still spoke to God when the wind blew from the east. She never buried hope, she just folded it quietly into her mornings. Then came the sound. Not thunder, not storm. A low vibration, like the sky clearing its throat. It was wrong somehow, not of this world, low and wide and layered, like metal dragging across the firmament. The chickens scattered, the goat ran, the wind held its breath. Sod straightened slowly, squinting past the mango trees and sunbaked roofs toward the hills beyond her land. She saw the flash first, a shimmer of light bending air, as if heat had bloomed too early in the season. Then, with a long, deep groan, the air splitted, a shape descended from the clouds. Not a plane, not a drone, something wider, rounder, built from both memory and impossible futures. The craft landed in the fallow field near the edge of her plot, where no grass had grown since the last dry season. The soil cracked beneath it, but did not scream. And then silence. She did not run. Her legs wouldn't move. For a second, she didn't breathe. Her eyes stung, her fingers trembling against the folds of her skirt. The ship hissed open, sides shifting like stone learning to breathe, and then figures. Two of them, stepping slowly, silhouettes framed in backlight and dust. The taller one walked with careful, grounded strength, shoulders broad, face unreadable in the haze. The other was smaller, thinner, with a steady but fragile gait, a head held high, not out of pride, but out of pure survival. The light shifted, the shadows dropped, and the taller one stepped forward. Sod gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Her knees gave way. She crumpled to the soil as if struck by lightning, not in pain, but in the overwhelming collapse of certainty into truth. Tears came uninvited and holy, pouring down her cheeks in rivulets that carved through the years. She tried to say his name but couldn't, tried to crawl forward, but her body was shaking too hard. He knelt in front of her slowly, reverently, and for a moment he didn't speak. He just looked at her, studying every wrinkle, every scar, every change time had etched onto her beloved face. His own face was different, harder, angular, scarred along the cheek and brow. But the eyes, those wide, unblinking, soulful eyes, were still hers. Still the boy she sang to beneath mosquito nets. Still the brother who used to run through her legs with Amina close behind. He reached into a pouch at his side, worn leather, faded, and pulled something out, a small object, round, flat, metal, old. He took her shaking hand in his calloused one and placed the token in her palm. Her fingers closed around it, on instinct. When she opened them, her breath caught. It was the old coin, brass-plated, etched, with his name in scratched handwriting from when he was 8 years old, pressed into a pendant that had once hung from his school bag. The one she had sewn into his jacket before the sky fell. Sod let out a sob, sound torn between agony and salvation, and cupped his face with both hands, rough palms shaking. "My baby," she whispered, finally finding her voice. "My babies." The girl stepped forward, slower. Her hair was cut short, her left eye marked with a faint burn scar. But her hands moved in that same fidgeting rhythm she had as a child, always pulling at her fingers, always tracing the edge of her sleeves. "Mama," Amina whispered, and the world broke open. Sod pulled her close, wrapping both arms around her, sobbing against her daughter's small frame, her voice cracking with disbelief and joy and years of aching quiet. The three of them knelt there in the dirt, a triangle of reunion where pain and time lost all authority. The wind picked up gently. A single mango dropped from the tree. And finally, when the silence settled enough for breath again, Joleel leaned forward, placed his forehead against his mother's, and whispered with trembling certainty, "I remember your voice.